Good evening. I welcome you all to this year's Kristallnacht service. Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, refers to the evening of November 9th, 1938, when Nazi officials unleashed a sudden and unprovoked attack on the Jewish citizens of Germany. Throughout the evening, the glass windows of shops owned by Jews were shattered and their stores were vandalized. Synagogues throughout the country were burned and desecrated. In addition, many Jewish men were arrested, taken from their homes, and sent to concentration camps. Kristallnacht was, in fact, the beginning of the systemic persecution of Jews that would culminate in the Holocaust. The National Catholic Center for Holocaust Education was founded at Seton Hill in the fall of 1987. The first activity of the new center was a Kristallnacht commemoration, held in November of that year. Tonight, we continue the tradition of remembering the victims of that terrible night and of praying for an end to war and violence in our own time. This evening, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Lauren Apter Bairnsfather, Executive Director of the Anne Frank Center USA, and we eagerly look forward to hearing her remarks. Now I would like to introduce Dr. James Paharic, Director of Seton Hill's National Catholic Center for Holocaust Education.
Well, thank you, President Finger, and thank you all for being with us this evening. Normally, we have this service in our chapel, St. Joseph's Chapel. Many of you have been there for that service over the years. As Dr. Finger mentioned, we've been doing this for more than 35 years. We've been remembering the night of November 9th, 1938, praying for the victims and praying for peace in our own time when, again, we're in a time of so much violence and turmoil. So it's important that we be together this evening. Tonight we have a special episode or a special session of Kristallnacht because this is part of our conference that is taking place. It began yesterday afternoon and continued throughout today and will continue tomorrow. So the program is being live streamed to our conference audience who are participating virtually this evening. And it is a special evening too because of our speaker, Dr. Lauren Bairnsfather, who will be presenting us with a reflection this evening. So let's begin our program with a musical piece. It's called I Believe by David Blackwell.
6 million Jewish men and women, 1.5 children among them, were taken by other human beings to die in gas and fire, their ashes spewed from the chimneys of Auschwitz, to mingle with the breezes and fall, nameless and graveless, over a continent that had become a graveyard. We commit ourselves to being responsible for one another, to building on this earth a room that has no place for hatred, no place for violence. Lord, as we gather today, we pray for courage and we pray for strength. We remember the eruption of the violence on November 9th, 1938, the vicious anti-Semitism with destructive, deadly violence. We remember the terror that struck at the central institution of Jewish life, when some 200 synagogues were set ablaze, desecrated, destroyed. We remember that state-organized violence became permissible, even acceptable, as 7,500 places of business were ransacked, along with many thousands of private homes. We remember that violence became more calculated and dangerous, and that more than 100 Jews were killed outright, and nearly 25,000 shipped off to concentration camps. We are almost afraid to make ourselves remember these horrors, but we are even more afraid to forget. We cannot erase yesterday's pain, but we can vow that the suffering was not in vain. may we remember and yet not lose hope. We must face evil, and in doing so, reaffirm our faith in the future. For those who found the courage to stand against evil, often at the cost of their lives, let us vow to carry on their struggle.
Before I ask you to stand, I'm going to light a Yortzeit candle, a memorial candle, in memory of those who died on Kristallnacht, but also acknowledging that today is Veterans Day and that there were soldiers who went to try and serve, who did serve, and tried to prevent this and bring it to an end. Please rise. The Shema, proclaiming the oneness of God, is said at daybreak and nightfall. It has been on the lips of the Jews for thousands of years. These words came to be the last words recited by many going to their death. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command to you this day shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. You may be seated. Thus says the Lord, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are not. The savage, searing breath of the Holocaust was also felt by those who risked their lives to give a helping hand to their neighbors in their hour of darkness, and by those others who died for the crime of being different in a time of madness and terror.
Why are you so far away from me, from the words of my groaning? O my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, and I find no rest.
I will walk in the presence of the Lord, in the land of the living. I will walk in the presence of the Lord, in the land of the living.
Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried, and they were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame.
I will walk in the presence of the Lord, in the land of the living.
I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in my breast. My mouth is dried up like clay, and my tongue cleaves to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death.
I will walk in the presence of the Lord, in the land of the living.
But you are the Holy One, enthroned in praise of Israel. In you our mothers and fathers trusted. They trusted and you rescued them. To you they cried out and they escaped. In you they trusted and were not disappointed.
Many of you have heard the words of Reverend Martin Niemöller. They've come down to us right after World War II and are still often quoted. Reverend Niemöller was a pastor of a church in Germany when the Nazis took over, and he actually did offer some resistance. Was put in prison during a large part of the war. And still, when he came out, he felt that he and the German people as a whole had not done enough in the face of Hitler's violence and terror. So his words still ring true to us today. Here's what he wrote. First, they came for the communists. I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So it's a profound reflection on the nature of silence in the face of violence and bigotry, and the importance of standing up for what is right. I also want to read you some of the words of Pope John Paul II, who as a young man was in training to be a priest when the Nazis took over Poland, and they victimized in Poland not only Jews, but Catholics and intelligentsia, the Polish intelligentsia, as a way of stamping out Polish culture and creating what they called Lebensraum, which was living space in Poland, which happened to be already occupied by a population and a culture who, of course, the Nazis considered to be inferior. Pope John Paul wrote, "Remembering the Shoah means hoping that it can never happen again, and working to ensure that it does not. Faced with such immeasurable suffering, we cannot remain cold. Faith teaches us that God does not forsake those who suffer persecution. Rather, in the end, God enlightens all peoples and leads them on the road to salvation." Again, important words for our time. So, our Kristallnacht services here at Seton Hill are a solemn occasion, and as I mentioned, we normally hold them in the chapel, but we always have a testimony as part of our service. Often over the years, we've had Holocaust survivors speak to us at Kristallnacht, many of whom began their struggles after that terrible night of the broken glass, where they were either eventually incarcerated or had to flee the country. Tonight we have a little bit of a different program, and as I mentioned, Dr. Lauren Bairnsfather is with us this evening. Dr. Bairnsfather is the Chief Executive Officer of the Anne Frank Center, USA. This is a fairly recent post for her because for many years she served as the Executive Director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, which is where I first met her. Now, this will sound a little bit strange because she's so much younger than I am, but Lauren has been a mentor to me during my time at the center. I started in 2019, and she was already on the job in Pittsburgh for 4 or 5 years before then. And she was the first person I called for advice about what to do to run the center. And one of my first priorities was remembering, it was the 1-year anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting. And I was determined to commemorate that first anniversary. So again, I called Lauren and she spoke here. We had a wonderful program that evening, and I'm grateful that Lauren was a part of that night. So a little bit about her background. She holds a doctorate in history from the University of Texas at Austin. You'll hear some of her historical training, I think, come through in her presentation this evening. She also serves on the boards of the Association of Holocaust Organizations, which is a nationwide group, and also the Council of American Jewish Museums. I am very pleased and really delighted that Lauren is with us. We've been close colleagues over the years and friends as well. So Lauren, welcome to Seton Hill.
Well, that was quite generous. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And indeed, I have worked closely with Seton Hill, and I am so grateful to be here with you today, really. So thank you to everyone on the stage, to President Finger. This is a very special place, and it's special because of programs like this. So I want to thank you again. We're together today on Veterans Day, and we're commemorating Kristallnacht, which we also call the November 1938 pogrom, and I'll use that term in my remarks. This past week saw a modern pogrom when, this is a quote, anti-Semitic hit-and-run squads launched a coordinated attack against Jewish and Israeli soccer fans in Amsterdam, and I'm sure you're all aware of that. As the news broke from Amsterdam, just as quickly came stories of Israelis chanting anti-Palestinian slogans and tearing down a Palestinian flag. Despite clear evidence of a premeditated, coordinated attack, many looked for reasons to blame the Jews for the violence perpetrated against them. And indeed, that's what happened after Kristallnacht, so I'm calling attention to this parallel. You may have heard that there were all of these parallels. Certainly they happened at the same time, right, November 9th. I hesitate to make so clear a parallel, but indeed that is one thing that happened in both instances. So my subject tonight is Kristallnacht and Jewish diaspora. And I'm including the experience of the Frank family. As you heard, I am now the CEO of the Anne Frank Center USA. One thing that I always like to do is I want to tell you something that maybe you haven't heard before. So you can let me know later if I have been successful. As a Holocaust educator and historian, this is a little behind the scenes, I often broaden the context or I shift the timeline because I want to build a deeper understanding of historical events. So when we consider the November 1938 pogrom, the Nazi-perpetrated terror that swept across Germany, Austria, and parts of Czechoslovakia, there's much to be gained by looking at global events. Our best tool for considering the global Jewish experience is to look at the Jewish diaspora. This lens reminds us that the Holocaust is not just Jewish history, but is in fact world history. Diaspora is a word of Greek origin that describes the scattering of Jewish people from the original home in the land of Israel. Over the past year, as we've witnessed rising visible anti-Semitism since the Hamas attack in Israel on October 7th, 2023, I've developed a talk that covers 4,000 years of Jewish history from our origins in Canaan, present-day Israel, through centuries of exile, violence, and forced migration. That is not the talk I'm giving tonight. We don't have enough time. Anti-Semitism is a racist ideology which includes anti-Jewish hate, stereotyping and scapegoating of Jews, along with the belief in a global Jewish conspiracy. Anti-Semitism has been the motivating ideology behind centuries of persecution of the Jews. The most extreme example we have of this is the Holocaust, which I'll define as the bureaucratic, state-sponsored murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazis and their collaborators. Scholars often divide the history of the Holocaust into 2 blocks of time. 1933 to 1939, encompassing the Nazi rise to power, the implementation of restrictions against political opponents, and the systematic persecution of German Jews and other groups. The Nazis' aim was to get the Jews to leave Germany in this phase. That's what they were looking to do. This is not yet genocide. The second time period encompasses the beginning of World War II, September 1939, and ends in 1945. These were the years of vast German territorial expansion, mass murder, and genocide, and I thank everyone who spoke before me who really gave us some good context for what I just said. So events in the 1930s are the focus of my remarks tonight, but we'll also look at preceding events in earlier times that set the stage for what was to come. And I believe this was my bottle of water. Thank you. Thank you all. I warned them I would be thirsty. Okay. Thank you. In 1933, the majority of Europe's Jews lived in Eastern Europe. I don't have any images, or I would be showing you many maps. So I asked myself, why were most of the Jews in Europe living where they were? Like not taking anything for granted. And the story is that historically, during medieval times, exiles within Europe pushed millions of Jews to the east, eventually to become subjects of the Russian Empire, and forced to live in the Russian Pale of Settlement at the empire's western border. That may be a new term. Some people are nodding their heads, the Pale of Settlement. The Pale of Settlement was established by Catherine the Great in 1791 and included parts of current Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, and more countries. Within the Pale of Settlement, Jews experienced frequent outbursts of violence from their non-Jewish neighbors. This is where we get the word pogrom. It's estimated that 100,000 Jews were killed in pogroms inside the Pale of Settlement. This was one reason that nearly 2 million Jews left the Pale of Settlement and its successor states to emigrate to this hemisphere. And that was between 1880 and 1924. From this wave of immigration, 1.75 million Jews settled in the United States. The majority of Jews in the United States today descend from this wave of immigration, and that's why I'm mentioning it to you. It certainly is my family's history on all sides. So what we had was the immigrants to the United States from the Pale of Settlement left their families behind. Some family members stayed behind in Europe, of course, and those family members were unlikely to survive the Holocaust. I like to share this point because I've heard the criticism that Jews are so obsessed with the Holocaust. This is why. Our families were killed in Europe, our close relatives, okay? And we were here in safety. So you can think about what that would feel like and how that gets handed down to generations. Okay. At the same time that 2 million Jews left the Pale of Settlement and left the European continent, there were Jews who left the Pale and its successor states but remained in Europe. Okay. Approximately 100,000 Jews with Polish citizenship lived in Germany in 1933 with permanent resident status, and this is going to connect us back to the November pogrom. Now, among the most painful moments in history for me are the stories of people, or in this case of Jews, who understood the danger and acted to get out of harm's way, only to find themselves trapped in an even worse situation. I will come back to the experience of the Frank family, and I'll mention now that by 1934, the members of the extended Frank family, so that's Otto Frank, his siblings, and their mother, had all left Germany for different countries in Europe. Where they decided to seek refuge turned out to spell the difference between life and death for the Frank family. Okay. So Holocaust education organizations and museums often look at the November 1938 pogrom for its foreshadowing of events to come, and we talked about that a little bit already tonight. An often overlooked part of the story of the November pogrom is the story of the Jews with Polish citizenship who had gone to Germany seeking safety in the early 20th century. Their brutal treatment at the hands of the Nazis and the Poles was the catalyst for the chain of events that led to the November 1938 pogrom. In 1938, the Nazis expanded their territory, so they annexed Austria and part of Czechoslovakia. The response from the Polish government was a concern that Jews living in exile in either Germany or in Austria might come back to Poland. So they stripped the Jews living outside of Poland of their Polish citizenship. That left these 100,000 Polish Jews in Germany unprotected. You know, citizenship protects us with rights. So that had been removed. Now they were vulnerable, and Germany already had a plan to exile any Jews living there who did not have German citizenship. Okay? So exile they did 17,000 Jews to an area on the Polish and German border. Poland didn't let them in, Germany pushed them out, so these people are living in horrific situations, stateless, homeless, without food and shelter, in an area that was known as the Green Border. Now, I learned about the Green Border from a Holocaust survivor in Pittsburgh, Irene Schulman. Are there people here who know Irene Schulman? Probably on the stage. She was recorded in an oral history by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh in 1989. And you can listen to it right now if you want to on the webpage of the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, which is ushmm.org. Just search Pittsburgh survivor testimonies and she'll come up. She is a very powerful, opinionated woman, smart, and she recalls in the testimony about her family. We organized very strongly to help these people who were desperate. Every Jewish family had to take in a family to protect. They didn't live with us, but they ate with us. They did very badly, these people. It was like overnight they were robbed of their citizenship in their country, everything that was solid under their feet. A lot of them died. Irene also shares the memory of a friend who explained that just before their deportation from Germany, her family had sent, quote, small things, jewelry, to Montevideo in Uruguay. Irene concluded, the jewels went to Uruguay and the people went to Auschwitz. Among the population of Jews sent to the Green Border were the parents of Herschel Grinspan. Upon learning of his family's desperate situation, the 17-year-old retaliated by shooting a German embassy official stationed in Paris, and that was Ernst von Roth. That was on November 7th of 1938, and von Roth died 2 days later, on November 9th of 1938. This became the Nazis' excuse for the violence of Kristallnacht, was the assassination of von Roth in Paris. And that would not have happened had it not been for the deportation of these Polish Jews who had fled their situation in the successor state to the Pale of Settlement. So that ties it all together. We've heard a lot already about what happened on Kristallnacht. Rioters destroyed hundreds of synagogues and Jewish institutions. Synagogues were burned throughout the night in full view of the public and of firefighters who had received instructions not to intervene, only if they were going to prevent flames from spreading to nearby non-Jewish buildings should they intervene and put out the flames. SA and Hitler Youth members shattered shop windows of an estimated 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses and looted their wares. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated in many regions. 91 Jewish men were killed, according to the official number, but now it's generally believed that it's a much higher number when you take into account people who died from their injuries after that day. It also set off a massive refugee crisis, the likes of which the 20th century hadn't really seen. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested for being Jewish, and they were released only on the condition that they could prove that they at least had begun the process to emigrate from Germany. Okay. By this time, Otto Frank's brothers were established in England and France. His sister and their mother lived in Switzerland. That was sister and her husband and their children were in Switzerland. Otto and his family, wife Edith and daughters Margot and Anne, had been together in Amsterdam since 1934. The Netherlands had been neutral in World War I, and Otto Frank had reason to believe his family would be safe there. In 1938, Otto Frank began the process of applying for a visa to the United States under the quota for people born in Germany. All visas were issued by the American consulate in Rotterdam. When Rotterdam was bombed on May 14, 1940, all documents were destroyed, and the process had to begin anew. In the aftermath of the November 1938 pogrom, between 1939 and 1941, more than 300,000 people born in Germany joined waiting lists for immigration visas to the United States. Most of these people were Jews. In the United States, Otto Frank had a powerful friend in Nathan Strauss of the family that owned Macy's department stores. Nathan Strauss was not able to help, nor were Otto's two brothers-in-law who already lived in the United States. Otto Frank continued to write to Nathan Strauss throughout the first years of the war. With no options at hand, the Frank family went into hiding in the secret annex in Amsterdam on July 6th of 1942. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam cooperated on an inquiry into Otto Frank's efforts to gain entry into the USA and determined that his application was never reviewed. The Frank family survived in hiding for more than 2 years, helped by a small team of righteous Dutch citizens. On August 4th, 1944, the hiding place was discovered, and the 8 people living there were arrested and sent to Auschwitz. Anne and Margot were transferred to the Nazi concentration camp Bergen-Belsen, and both died there from typhus in March of 1945, months before the end of the war in Europe. Of the 8 people hiding in the secret annex, Otto Frank was the sole survivor. Otto Frank's 3 siblings and his mother survived the war. And in fact, if you look at the extended Frank family tree, the only people who died in the Holocaust were Edith, Anne, and Margot. So where you decided to go was a life or death decision. I'm going to connect the story of the Frank family back to the November pogrom by pointing out that Otto's application for entry into the United States was in competition with 300,000 other applications. At the time, the quota for entry into the US for people who had been born in Germany was just over 27,000 a year, so not 10% of the number of people on the list per year. So in conclusion, The Jewish refugee crisis in Europe grew worse after the November 38 pogrom, with few countries willing to take in Jewish immigrants, as had been demonstrated at the Evian conference in the summer of 1938, where many powers met and nobody wanted to take in the Jews. With Nazi expansion, millions more Jews fell victim to, quote, radical anti-Semitism, which is the term that historian Jeffrey Herf uses to describe the leap from persecution to extermination that began in 1939 and ended with the murder of 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, approximately 6 million individuals. That's the one figure that gets left out a lot of the time. We hear the number 6 million pretty often without knowing that there were about 9 million Jews in Europe. So that's 2 out of 3 Jews in Europe were killed in the Holocaust. Statelessness left Jews vulnerable in Europe. The inaction of the world made it possible to unleash hell on vulnerable groups in Europe. And those vulnerable groups were the Jews and also the Roma, who the Nazis also marked for extermination, for genocide. The story of Kristallnacht through the eyes of the Jewish diaspora demonstrates that the Holocaust cannot be viewed as Jewish history, nor is it European history. The Holocaust was a global catastrophe for Jews and for non-Jews alike. Events in the world today demonstrate increasing anti-Jewish and anti-Israeli violence around the world and similar responses to those we saw in the 1930s and the 1940s. Inaction, blaming the Jews for their misfortune. It is my hope in giving this talk that you will take it seriously when Jews are threatened with violence, and I know because I know the Seton Hill community, I know that you do. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory reminded us, hate that starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. In closing, I would like to thank Seton Hill for welcoming me back, and thank you to our veterans for their service and for your service to the veterans in the room. And the last thing I want to say is that this evening began with a celebration for Sister Gemma Del Duca. And at our table, when we had a toast, we said L'chaim, which is Hebrew for to life. And I want to say, as serious as this day is and as solemn as this event has been, that we also need to celebrate life and we need to keep on living, especially when challenges come our way. And it's just an honor to be with all of you here tonight. Thank you.
Well, Lauren, thank you very much. Your remarks were wonderful, as I knew they would be. And I look forward to publishing them in our book of conference proceedings. Every time we have a conference, those who present write papers that come out in a book. It'll take a couple months. I have to edit all of the essays, but we'll be publishing it soon, and your talk tonight will appear in the book as well. And speaking of the conference, those of you who are in the audience tonight here in Sicilian Hall or are attending the conference, and those who are watching virtually, just a reminder that it continues tomorrow morning at 9:30. We have events planned throughout the day. It'll start right here in this room and continue into the evening when our visiting scholar, Dr. Tim Patetti, will be speaking to us. So the theme of our conference is narrative in Holocaust education, and we had some wonderful presentations today. I very much look forward to continuing tomorrow morning. So now I ask that you stand. And in light of what we've heard this evening, I want to affirm that we have committed ourselves to reconciliation, to shalom, salam, to peace. So please offer one another a sign of peace. Very good. So we will conclude with our closing song. So please look at your program and sing along to the song called "This Is My Song."
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and nigh. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. So hear my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine. Teach us to sing, O God of all creation, a song of hope for ocean, sky, and high. Teach us to walk the way that ends division, till every land and nation love entwines. Then will all people see your glorious vision, the world at peace, beloved and divine.
Well, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. I just want to thank our music ministers this evening who did such a wonderful job. Yes, please give them a round of applause. And I also want to thank our reader, Esha Matthew, who actually, this is the third year at Kristallnacht that she read for us. She's going to be graduating, and I said, you're going to have to come back and read again next year. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank Tony Krasmarczyk, the director of campus ministry. This program is always a joint operation between our center and and campus ministry. And standing next to Tony, I heard he has a wonderful voice too. So we want to hear more of that. And then I want to thank Rabbi Perman, speaking of wonderful voices, for singing the Shema and for always being with us, such a faithful friend of the center. So Rabbi, thank you. And thank all of you for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to be with you, and we'll do it again next year, and I look forward to it. This is always a moving and very meaningful evening. So thank you. Be safe. You guys will turn that off. Thank you very much. You're welcome. We'll keep together. I want more light next year, please. We could get this on there. I know they turn the fluorescent on. If you get this one on, it's okay. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm going to work.